Hi everyone, thank you for joining us here. Today it's a great honor to have here Mr. Marko Vanelli. He is the country manager for Kosovo and North Mitrovica, Macedonia in the Central Asia and European region for the World Bank. And today he's going to be talking about the challenges in the labor market in Kosovo. And in the end, of course, you will have the opportunity to ask him questions, as we know that this is a very interesting topic for the students of RT Kosovo, especially you who are pursuing an economic degree. I don't want to take that so much time. However, let me thank you once again for joining us, and special thanks to Mr. Marko for coming here today, and let us please welcome him to the stand.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, thank you to the club for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be engaging with young people. So I've been asked, by the way, I'm also country manager for North Mitrovica. I've been asked to come and talk to you a bit about the World Bank view of the labor market in Kosovo and in Idris. So I'll try to do that with some slides. I think you all have an economics background to a certain degree, but if I get into too much jargon and things like that, just ask, stop me and ask if you need clarification. I'll try to go through three basic questions. One, is there a job problem in Kosovo? There I'll try to drive you through some data through comparable countries to see where Kosovo is compared to other countries. It's always good to see that comparison. The second question is, has the thing changed over time? And if there is a problem, has it changed over time? And the third is, what can we think about doing about it, if there is? So those are the three aspects of the presentation. I start from the premise that indeed there is a job problem in Kosovo, and I'll go through some of the slides and let's see if you agree with that. By the way, first of all, I'd like to drive your attention to this joint initiative with the World Bank Group and the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies, sponsored by the Austrian government. They have a lot of labor statistic data information at this website here, cjobsgateway.net. So feel free to access it in your, for your own information. But let's start with this employment rate. Where is Kosovo? Here. Here's you have all the Western Balkans 6 averages, and some other countries in the region. This is 2017, and this is from the website I just mentioned. Lowest employment rate in the region. You know that employment is defined as the percentage of people with employment as a percentage of the adult population, we're excluding children, etc. But fairly low. So, right, you see this and you say, well, it's the lowest employment in this region. When we look at unemployment rate, and sometimes it's confusing also for the economists, unemployment rate is the rate of unemployment, but you take the labor force as your denominator. And the labor force is people employed and people that are not employed who are actively looking for jobs. Okay? So those two together, it excludes people who just don't care, don't want to look for a job. So it's not the population, it's a subsector of the population. If you take that, Kosovo has the highest unemployment rate in this region. Again, taking 2017 as a reference point. Now, let's disaggregate this a bit, okay? Here we have a lot of ladies, and it's good to look at gender, male, female, whereas Kosovo. Kosovo, unfortunately, has the largest gap in employment between male and female, between men and women. One of the largest, every country in the region has a gap, but the gap is larger here. So there is also a gender issue when we look at labor statistics. If we look at from the unemployment now perspective, not the employment, you see that both males, men and women have the highest unemployment rate, but women have the highest unemployment rate in the region, and I can tell you that this is one of the highest in the world as an unemployment rate. So there's a gender problem already there by looking at these statistics. Now, you're all young. Here I hope you can see we try to disaggregate these statistics by age group. Blue is 15 to 6, is the total population, 20 to 64. Now, you guys fall in this category, 15 to 24, 25 to 29, etc. Again, Kosovo, you see, it's the lowest employment rate for young people in this group. I mean, of course, young people have difficulty accessing the labor market in the region, in Europe at all. I mean, I'm from Italy, and the same is true there. But here it's more severe. Even when you take the orange line, 25 to 29, it's higher, but still, you see, it stays below the rest of the region. So, not only a gender issue, but particularly a youth issue. Same thing when you look at from the unemployment rate perspective, so the percentage of people that are unemployment on the labor force, the highest youth unemployment in the region. And even when you take 25 to 29 years old, is very high. I mean, the same thing seen from a different angle. I'm moving between employment and unemployment also because sometimes people don't understand how the employment rate goes up and the unemployment rate goes up. Yes, please.
Why are the statistics considered from age 15? Aren't they only from 18?
Well, this is the statistics that this particular group jobs uses, okay? And so the same is true if you start from age 18. But for comparison purposes, they break it down 15 to 24, assuming that in Europe there are young people start working at 15. The legal age for working in my country is 14, for example. So you can have people that decide, I stop working, I stop studying, and I go to work at that age. But it doesn't change. It doesn't change if you plot that in. Now, an interesting thing, you should be the most educated of your lot soon, and it's good because if you look at this is what we call return on education in economics terms. So you invest in your education. Are you going to get a job? Well, the more you invest, the less likely you are to be unemployed. You know, this level is no school at all. Basic education. Secondary vocational, secondary gymnasium, and tertiary education, so university. Interestingly, in Kosovo, over time, it has become a bit more, there's a higher return on tertiary education, so you are better off finishing your university and looking for a job. But as you can see, the overall employment does not change much. But you are better off with higher education. Now, my whole premise here is that in Kosovo, the biggest problem is really inactivity. Inactivity is the percentage of people who are unemployed and plus the ones that are not looking for jobs at all. It's very high. You have one of the highest, again, in the region and in the world. It's close to 60%. So 6 out of 10 adults, take it from 15 onward or 18 onwards here, are not working or not looking for work. And that's the most challenging part. Again, we see the gender dimension of all this. These are women, and you see their inactivity rate is above 75%, and these are men. This is one of the highest inactivity for women in the world. So this country unfortunately competes for this negatively with countries in Africa or much more. There are cultural issues behind it, but there are also structural issues. We cannot just say culture. It's not just culture. It's structure and disincentives for women to join the labor forces. The same is true for young people. Again, the inactivity rate for young people in Kosovo is higher than the rest of Now, more worrisome for young people is this issue of, the definition of need. These are neither in employment or education or training. This is young people, I think up to age 24, who are not in school, not in training, not in work. So they are idle, as we say. And again, Kosovo has a quite large percentage of women and men that are in that situation. This is particularly a problem if you look at it from the demographic point of view, because Kosovo is the youngest country in this region, in Europe. So if Kosovo has a comparative advantage is young people. You don't sit on oil, you don't sit on other resources, but you have people, and you have young people, something that nobody else in this region has. And so if you don't employ these people, it's a waste. It's a national resources that is going to be wasted. All right. This is the picture today. So you would agree that when you look at this comparative statistics, there is a job problem. These are based on national statistics. So let's blame the national statistic office that, by the way, does a poor job. But let's blame that the statistics are inaccurate. Yes, but when you even putting a margin of error in all this, when you compare with other national statistics, the problem is there. Might not be as severe, but it's there. As a change over time? Well, not really. One thing you can say, well, these are growth rate, GDP growth rate. This line here, sorry, is not very visible, but the green one should be up there for 2017. This is 2010, and it goes to 2017. Now, don't get too much hung up on the colors, but this, where is it? Western Balkan average. This is the Western Balkan average, this is Kosovo. Consistently or almost consistently growing above the Western Balkan average. Positive, right? Okay, economic growth higher than in the rest. Well, that thing hides something that in economics we call the quality of economic growth. It's not just enough to have a volume, you want to have also an economic growth that brings jobs. Does it? Well, we have seen that not much. But in terms of economic growth, things seems to be relatively positive. Again, accounting for margin of errors and accounting, etc. This is 2018. This is something that we will launch tomorrow. Every 6 months, we present a report on growth in the Western Balkans. I don't know why everything here on Kosovo disappeared, but basically the message is that again, Kosovo here, keeps growing at a high level in the Western Balkans, definitely above Europe and the average of the Western Balkans. 4.2% is the estimated growth for 2018 based on available statistics. There are some good news also on the composition of growth. What elements contribute to this growth? And in the past, you had a lot of this, which is consumption. So it is you buying a TV, buying a house, nothing wrong with consumption. But you want to see also investments in your growth agenda, because otherwise, just by consumption, yes, you create some jobs, but these are retail jobs and not necessary. There's some investment appearing, it's mostly public investment, unfortunately. In any case, 2018 confirms the trend. There is some economic level of economic growth. When we look, however, then at these statistics over similar period, 2012 to 2017, this is the employment rate. No dramatic changes. So again, you can say, oh, economic growth, but no job creation. Again, inactivity rate, which is my main concern here, you see some movement on the men's side and the male side, definitely no movements on the women's side or this side. So women are not joining the market in any larger numbers than in the last 5 years at least. If you look at it from the youth and the age perspective, younger people, as expected possibly, their inactivity rate doesn't change much, but also for slightly older people, there's been a bump here in 2017. Let's see if it is confirmed going forward. All this to say that this is long-term unemployment, so people that are unemployed for more than, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the kind of 3 years, I believe, but it's a longer period. As you can see, even there, the number don't change. These are people that are unemployed for life, basically. They're unemployed and they never come out of unemployment. So all this message is leading to, yes, there is a level of economic growth, but it's not producing enough jobs and enough quality jobs to make a difference on those numbers that we have seen before, the unemployment and employment. This is again from the report that we'll have tomorrow, and it says again, comparing the region, this is Kosovo, there's been a slight decrease from 2017 to year in employment, but overall, you see this is Kosovo, it's hard to see compared to the other ones, and this is the entire year because it's divided in quarters. There's been a quite substantial drop in the first half of 2018 that is now being compensated enough in the second half. So there is a decline of 1 percentage point compared to 2017. Again, it's a year where there's 4.2 growth, but the employment figures dropped a bit. It's growth without jobs, and this is a main problem. All right, so I hope you get the picture. I don't want to be over dramatic about it, but Kosovo stands out negatively on these job statistics. So my initial question, is there a job challenge here? Definitely yes. And it's particularly acute for women and for young people. Now, what can we do about it? There are two ways to look at it, and now I'll drive you through a bit more of economics and the World Bank thinking. One is from the demand side of job, so creating new jobs. And you can create jobs in the public sector or in the private sector, right? That's a simplification. The other side is on the supply side of job. It's you. So do you bring to the market the right skills, the right capacity to match a demand with the supply of jobs? Now, I am suggesting that there is an agenda on both sides if we want to create more jobs in Kosovo. On the demand side, the economy needs to be more productive and competitive to produce more and better jobs. The World Bank works across the board. We have never seen a small economy, and this is a small economy, landlocked in particular, with the export to GDP ratio of Kosovo. You need more exports to grow. Because your market, your economy is limited. So you cannot rely on the domestic market. You cannot rely just on consumption. You need to expand, okay? It's expand the pie. And the only way to expand the pie is to be more competitive and exporting more. Now, this is not yet happening. Why? Well, informality is very high. So there's informality is not bad per se. Informality is economy, generate jobs. Unfortunately, generate jobs for people that then don't get benefits. They don't get pension, they don't get paid fully, etc., etc. So they cannot live a full life, they cannot express themselves fully and contribute fully. And the same is true for the revenue side of things. These are firms, informal, that then they don't contribute to increasing revenues in the economy. In any case, informality is a problem. This is something that strikes me a lot. There are a lot of what we call micro firms in the private sector. These are firms with less than 9 employees. Now, interestingly, they dominate the private sector. Established firms, older firms, our analysis indicated they're not creating jobs right now. At best, they are keeping jobs. Why? Because they're moving from, they're established, so they're older firms, they're moving from a model that was labor intensive to a model that is more, where productivity has increased, more technology, they need less people, okay? That's natural, but they're not creating jobs. They are the larger, they're at best maintaining or if not shedding jobs. So new job creation comes from these new startups, small firms. They face, however, difficult entry in the market. And this is the most striking thing. 4% of startups that start with less than 9 employees, they're still, only 4% have 10 or more employees after 5 years. So they don't grow. Okay, so this is a major constraint of the private sector here. It's a lot of small firms or micro, and they don't grow. But they should be the engine of job creation. And unfortunately, they are not allowed to grow. Some of the bottlenecks are on the infrastructure side, you know very well, electricity and other things that make firms struggle. But there's also a lot on the business and regulatory environment. Not so much what we call the doing business here for the private sector. Not so much on your regulation, your legislation. It's all right compared to Europe and other things. It's the application of it. It's the number of inspections that you get. It's the number of documents that you need to provide for a simple procedure that may strangle particularly small and medium-sized enterprise. On the public sector side, there's a high level of spending, increasingly high on salaries and wages in the private sector that competes with wages in the private sector. Okay, they go up on one side, and the private sector will have to compete with that. And also a lot of, I put pensions in quote unquote, but these are social benefits that are popping up left and right, in part of the legacy of your past, war veterans benefits and other things. Again, nothing wrong with that if you can afford it, but they tend to be not targeted on the poorest, so they are not social benefits, they are entitlement for life. And you know, I say if you can afford it, because then they take away space, public spending, that you could invest in education, your human capital, or the physical capital, roads, energy, and other things. So the public investment model is being crowded out by what we call in economics recurrent expenditure, okay, in your lives. So we are arguing that the growth model is to tilt more export and productive sectors. This is another view of informality, but let's keep it just to prove that there are high level of informality. This is what we have been advocating for a while, that we think Kosovo economy is in a bit of a vicious circle. You can start here, lack of job creation. Well, this leads to migration, which in itself generates remittances, or aid, and this come back as fueling domestic demand, so they support the growth, but it's consumption. It's you know, buying a house, buying a TV, buying a car. It's not really investment, okay? This is the downside of narrowing the production base and keeping low productivity here, you know. Lack of job creation. There's a large appeal of public sector employment. You know, everybody wants to work for the private sector, higher wages, better benefits. And underemployment in key critical sectors like agriculture and other things. This again generates a vicious cycle. All this fuels back because, you know, you have an economy that doesn't produce enough to export or is not competitive enough. So there is large imports of goods and small export performance, limited competitiveness, productivity. This limits business expansion. So the famous small firms, they don't grow, and therefore they don't grow because of this, but they don't grow also because they don't find the adequate skills, and hence, again, job creation. All right, I hope I didn't complicate too much your life, but it's a visual way to say you need to cut this somewhere. You need to enter on this point here, on production, competitiveness, on human capital, in order to break this circle, this cycle. Okay? It's not always like this. There's some years where more investment comes in, but overall, this is the situation, and that's what needs to be broken up. So that's the agenda, we think, on the demand side, shifting from policies and incentives that are tilted toward consumptions and imports against private sector development, investment and export, and make it a bit more equal, where you can balance off that a bit more. On the supply side, bringing skills and one of the most important competitive advantages that Kosovo has is youth. I mentioned it before. It's youth. Youth needs to be activated and supported to enter the job market. Otherwise, there are consequences. So it's a blessing, but it can be a curse. Because if you do not utilize this resource that Kosovo has, well, at best, you have immigration. Ciao, I'm leaving. I'm going abroad. At worst, you can have social tensions, or worse, people start deciding, well, I cannot find a job, let me start trading in drugs or something else illegal. I mean, it's a source of income. Or, coffee and more coffee. And that's the downside of it, okay? So it's a blessing, but it's a curse if it is not properly used. Education and skills play a critical role, also in breaking, this cycle here, at this level, inadequate human capital base. Why? Well, currently, and we'll see some statistics, the education system, you might be an exception, is you're in an elite institution, is not producing the right skills for the market. And we are not talking only of technical skills. More and more the global economy needs problem solvers, needs people who can think beyond their narrow specialization. This is what is required. You need to be constantly trainable. You need to be able to move from one sector to another. I started as an economist. I worked 8 years in education, in development, so education, municipal development. Now, so you need to be able to have a base that allows you the flexibility to navigate these things. I'm not advocating that everybody should be a generalist, no way. But even if you're a specialist, you need to have the flexibility to be evolving during your lifetime. And this is something that the education system needs to provide from your early years, early childhood development, etc. This is not happening here. We need to close the gender gap. I hope I made a persuasive case that we need more women in the market. And we need activation policy, because if we wait for education to solve all the problem, there is generations of young people and women who will be left out of the market. We need to find ways to activate them tomorrow, not in 10 years. Okay, this is again a way to see the comparative advantage. This is Kosovo 2014, this is Bosnia-Herzegovina, your demographic. This is the demographic of a young country with a lot of energy here at the bottom. This is much similar to old Europe, where you need to think much more about pensions, etc., and you have a much smaller entry into the labor force. Last year, the only country in Europe that expanded the working age group share of the population is Kosovo. The only one, which again, an advantage, but a huge loss if these people join the labor market, try to join the labor market, and there's no space for them to join. All right. Is education not producing the right skill? Well, are you familiar with PISA? PISA is yeah, all right. Well, this is Kosovo here, with the Dominican Republic and Algeria and other countries. You see, quite low. Again, I don't want to make a humongous deal of this thing, but it's an indication, okay? Again, you have a question?
I just wanted to say that nobody took this test seriously because they chose students randomly, and I was part of this. And the people who I was with in the room, they all said that nobody will know my name. Nobody will know how I'll score here. There are no grades. I will not be punished. So I'll just not do anything.
There's that effect. It happens. There's such a thing called PISA effect. So the more countries take it and pay attention to it, the more it improves and the faster it improves. And in part is also because is seen. But even other countries that started, and everybody in the world started with that. I don't take it seriously. They tend to perform better. So Kosovo is really, even accounting for margin of error, quite at the bottom of the pile. And I work in Macedonia is in a similar situation. I work in North Macedonia. It's pretty bad there as well. You don't get all the wisdom out of statistics. I agree completely. It's more nuanced. It's just one indication. But if quality from measured this way, but let's measure it from what the firms expect. Maybe that's another way to see. This is a STEP. I don't remember what STEP stands for. Survey of finance. Okay, it's an employer survey. You see, labor factors are they're not the top concerns of firms. They're much more concerned about corruption, electricity, but it's an important concern. And when you look at this, you disaggregate that, skills, work experience are at the top. I'll zap through quickly. Skill constraints for firms are particularly important in occupation that require higher skill, but also a medium to lower skill level. You see, they're at the top of the concern of employers. These are employers that say, I have difficult time finding the right people. Particularly severe in Kosovo, especially for higher skill. This is higher skills, this is medium skills. You see, again, with some comparisons, this is the percentage of film that have difficulty finding the right skill. So there is a problem also from the skills perspective, firm's perspective. Very quickly, I mentioned this already. So there's a number of things that can be done on the supply side of things. Labor regulation play an important role, avoiding creating further rigidities in the system, particularly for young people to join. Part-time, is it possible to have more flexibility without exploiting people? Because that's the other side of flexibility. Flexibility, but no exploitation. That's one. Incentives to move from informal to formal. Okay? There are different policies that you can do, both on the taxation, but also on designing social protection. If a family of 4 gets grandpa's pension, a social protection here, there may not be enough incentives to go to work. So target social protection. Active labor market policies, and all the disincentives to remove barriers for women. Child care and health care. A lot of women stay home to take care of children and elderly. If you have a better system for that, there's more time and space for women to join the labor market. So on and so forth. Skills, I already made the case of this. It's important to strengthen skills. And also information gaps. You know very well here that finding a job is who you know in this country. We need to break this cycle, is to make information, so match private sector in particular and job seeker in a more intelligent and strategic way. That requires partnership between public and private and a lot of information. So that's it. So I wanted to stay within time. I'll take questions. Yes, please.
Do you think that if Kosovo allowed free labor movements, since we have the comparative advantage in youth, that would fix sort of deal of the problem, like a chunk of it?
Few labor movement with
Other countries.
Well, it's a double-sided story. Free labor movement may take away, as it is in this region, for example, nurses, doctors, to places where there's a high demand of it, And so they go there for better salaries, and then you're left without it. From the individual point of view, great, better life. From the country point of view, mixed story. So I'm not advocating to, actually my opinion is not to block movement. Actually, if your aspiration to move into Europe is to have a free, but you need to be smart about it. You need to be smart in creating opportunities also here, otherwise you risk losing all your young population to other options that may be, in the short term, more attractive. Of course, people don't move only for a salary, or stay only for a salary. You know, I think, you know, most people would like to contribute and stay in the place where they grew up, or close, because of relatives and cultural attachments. So it is important to open up, but also create the right conditions to be able to, and also create the right condition for people go to come back. You have a huge diaspora abroad that can contribute much more than just by sending money, with concrete skills, return, and etc. In this country. So there are two sides to opening up as well, yeah, particularly for small economies. Please.
Okay, you mentioned how remittances and different social assistance programs have kind of raised the reservation wage and people do not join the traditional economy. Is there any study, or did you analyze the underground economy in Kosovo and how much it's...
The informal?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there was a slide there, I don't remember, there was definitely, it's a lot, you know, studying the informal economy is always hard because it's informal, so you don't have a lot of data. But anecdotally, it's large here as a share of the economy. So the employment figures and everything don't capture, and also growth don't capture fully the story, because in Italy we have the same. We have and also we have a large criminal economy in my country that also has an economic impact on the thing. But in any case, it's hard to capture. We know it's large. We know that you cannot just go from large to zero, nor it makes sense, but you can systematically try to address that issue. Eliminating barriers to formalize. It's important both for firms and for people who are entering labor market. That is important. So currently, looking at your social assistance and also at your remittances, because you know, you reach a level where everybody feels relatively okay, well then the incentive is, I'm not going to make this step where I have to work more and maybe just marginally get more. I prefer to stay comfortably where I am. So all these things are important. I'm not here to advocate to you that there is an easy solution to these issues. It's complex, but it's something that requires attention and planning, and not just ad hoc measures. Yes.
I remember we had a guest lecture here with a professor from the University of Zagreb that addressed the issue of informal economy, but more from the perspective of what Marco mentioned, the difficulties to measure it.
Yes.
Once you can quantify it and look at the characteristics, it's easier to address. Because some of the activity is illegal, not because of tax, but it's criminal activity. It cannot be legalized, like drugs and prostitution. But if you can go back to the slide that showed the main shortcomings that firm mentioned as a barrier for the growth.
The firms?
Yes, this one.
This one?
The other one. This one. It is true that here the labor market or the features of the labor force are not seen as the main barrier, but because the study is done with all businesses.
Yes.
And Marco mentioned that
the small one.
only 4% of the businesses are those that really can create jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And once you are in that position, then this becomes really huge.
This is huge, yes.
Yes. For those particular businesses that we expect them to create jobs, the skills mismatch is a huge problem.
Yes, exactly. And then you start getting into this situation,
yes,
you see, where they all face problems. And interestingly, they face problem on specialized skills, which is more normal, engineers. Okay, there's a short, but also on generic skills. So they have, if you talk to firms, they seem to, in part is perception, in part, so information, matching information is also important, but in part is possibly reality. They think that they don't get people that are trainable. You know, they are willing to take in someone and say, okay, I'll give you the chance to train on the job for 1 year, but they think in some cases they lack those basic skills, and that's more problematic. Please.
My question is related, I mean, you highlighted that one of the most important things for job generation and growth is a vibrant private sector. If you look at doing business report of Kosovo, we see that we have been improving substantially, I mean, our ranking, but at the same time we see that we have a lot of barriers. What's your take on that? I mean, are we doing more improvements on the form rather than the substance? How do you...
Let me start with a disclaimer that I'm not a humongous fan of how we're doing business. I mean, it's an important analysis, and it has an advantage of comparing countries across. It underlines, however, it focuses on the regulatory framework on paper, mostly, okay? And it misses the application of it. So, yes, Kosovo has made some progress, has jumped from 120th position out of 190.
We were even proclaimed as top reformer.
Last year, you were among the top 10 reformers.
Yes.
It's a mechanical measurement, but so you had the reforms on access to credit, bankruptcy, I think, and something else that, you know, allow you to jump. Now, there is a gap, however, what you have on paper, and then is the reality of business that goes beyond the indicators of doing business, because then it has to do with the legal framework and the applicability of it, enforcement of contracts, and certainty of enforcement of contracts, undue and requests from public sectors when it comes to inspections and other things, or certification where they extract a bribe, etc., etc. So those things are not captured, and those are the ones that possibly affect mostly the job year. So I would say Kosovo needs to continue to simplify as much as possible, but also pay a lot of attention on implementation of, because otherwise you have a law and that is good, meets European standards, the same in environment. You meet the European standard, but then it's not enforced and it doesn't benefit you at all. So that's the main challenge, I think.
And by the way, the doing business report simply adds your score on different indicators. It's a simple addition. Mm-hmm. Imagine that you have a score of 10 on how easy it is to create a business, and you have a score of 10 also on getting the building permits. If you have a 0 score on getting electricity, still your score is high, but it means there will be no businesses, because if you don't get access to electricity, you will not start a business. But the score looks attractive. So
but
you have,
at
for
the same
example,
time, we've been proclaiming last year that we're top performer, which means, I mean, if you don't you would be...
We take the blame for that.
Amazing.
It's, you know, if you look strictly from the doing business methodology, you know, Kosovo had made progress. Largely also because there was a USAID program that was specifically trying to improve, and they were happy. Now that program is off, and I hope we will have to see how it continues. So I haven't seen the details of the new one, 2019. I think you stay in that range, but I haven't seen the details.
there was a book written on this, because internationally there is a paradox. Georgia is the top performer worldwide, but investments go to Croatia first. Croatia doesn't look good on the doing business report, and then two of my friends from Croatia did a book to compare this and see why there is no correlation between the score in doing business and the real investments. And you see that it has to do with the way, as Marco mentioned, how this mechanically indicators are
it's an indicator, but it doesn't tell you the full story of the business environment. North Macedonia is 9th in the world. I mean, 9th is very high. And so it doesn't tell you the full story, but it tells you an important story. So it's good to focus on this, but it's not the full story. Please. please. And then in the back.
You mentioned that there is definitely a skills gap between graduates and the demand for jobs. And is there anything being done about this by the World Bank? And do you also think that introducing vocational schools would kind of help ease this problem?
Yeah, there is a long-term agenda there, which is starting from the basics of education. We're working on that. It's not easy because I personally think there's no current view on the political side of where you want to take this country in education. And you need that view across governments to sustain it. You need to expand early childhood education. It's one of the lowest in this region. And if you start without having those mental development skills early on, because you are disadvantaged, you're always catching up. You need to strengthen basic education, etc. So there is a long-term agenda, but that's long-term. Then there is a more short-term agenda that has to do, as you said, with technical, vocational, tertiary, but more importantly, linking technical, vocational, and tertiary with the reality of the economy. I think it's important. Education is important in general. I think we do need artists, musicians, etc., etc. But you also need a percentage of your graduate to be directly linked to the demand of the economy, and that is not happening systematically. And so you can see it also from the profile of graduates, where you produce an enormous amount of lawyers, for example, that might not be fully employed in a market. So again, every country is facing this. Kosovo is not different, but with the demographic profile that you have, it's a more pressing agenda. So creating partnership, public-private partnership for activation policies, to pull people out of idleness, those needs, more women in the market. It's, I think, extremely important in the short, medium term if you don't want to lose a generation of young people.
Okay, one more question.
Yes, my question is related. So we've seen in the recent years that there's been an increase in the wages in the public sector, and also the entitlements for the war veterans and social benefits. Do you think that this made the public sector more attractive for the current labor force of Kosovo to join, and therefore the private firms don't have enough labor force left for them?
Well, there are two effects of that, and indeed there has been increase both in wages and categorical and untargeted social spending that are not targeted to the people who really need it necessarily. One is these incentives it creates because it makes the public sector much more attractive. And then it creates this vicious circle where most public appointments are given out not really on a merit basis, but on connections and other forms. So it does crowds out. It puts private firms at disadvantage because, Kosovo is not the cheapest labor market in the region. I mean, if you think it's more or less as costly as Bulgaria. Bulgaria is already in the EU. So, but you don't want to be extremely expensive in the private sector. Otherwise, it's hard to attract investments. I mean, you also have a comparative advantage of starting from a low base. I mean, the wish is to increase it fast, but you start from a low base. So there is that effect. The other effect is more on fiscal. It is crowding out in the budget, and it has been masked a bit by privatization receipts and other things. Is crowding out in your public spending, public investments with a return. I mean, productive public investments. and investing in education and skills, because it takes away a large chunk of your budget, an increasingly large chunk of your budget, for questionable uses. Do you want to reward and provide these incentives to join the labor market with these social schemes that seem to be proliferating left and right? I am a strong advocate of a welfare state, but it has to be well targeted to the people who need it, and it has to create a minimum disincentives to join the labor market, and fundamentally you need to afford it. Otherwise, your debt becomes like the Italian debt. And you're starting from low basis, but it's growing fast. And so you want to avoid that.
Well, thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you.